Boom. Common Sense Culver City and Dan O'Brien. Here we are.
Morning.
Good morning. So, for those who don't know, Common Sense Culver City is a political action committee dedicated to local issues. Got to say that correctly. Here in Culver City, helping people to engage, to get educated on the issues. We have no secret agenda. Dan, you should know that by now, and everyone who's going to come through this interview with us, there's nothing secret here. We're just going to put everything out there and see where it goes. And really, the goal of these kinds of conversations is to just simply, first of all, to have them. In the 20 plus years I've lived here in Culver City, I've never seen anything like this. So I'm excited to be part of something like this, that we're just talking openly and publicly about the things that affect all of us. And so you're here because you're running for city council. I think everybody should know that by now, but if they don't, they do now. And I think a lot of people, I certainly heard your name first from the Facebook group. It's probably it's the famous and infamous place.
Right.
Does that about sum it up?
Yeah, it became a bit of a, I don't know if burden's the right word, but kind of a learning laboratory for me.
Right. Yeah. My honest take on the group was, at first I was like, this is great. I'm going to learn a bunch of stuff about what's happening. And then over time, I think I got kind of swamped with there's too much happening in this group. I don't know how to filter it out. And so I kind of stopped participating for a bit, and over the years, and then came back to it later. And I think that, you've discussed this probably in a number of different places already, and I'm sure people are asking you this in one-on-ones. But so here we are, and I've as you know, I fielded questions from people anonymously on the Common Sense culvercity.org website. I did get a couple things about, how does Dan O'Brien, figure out, the moderation part of the group. And I know you've left the group now. Like, that page is you're no longer, as part of your run for city council, you're no longer admin and moderator on the Culver City unofficial page. But it did come up, and people, I think, want to hear more about it. Like why certain decisions were made about, this post doesn't get through because of whatever. And the thing that came through, and it's hard to moderate a page or a forum or anything like that. I do things like that in other capacities, like moderating a big discussion group. It's not easy, no doubt about it. And I think that the theme that was coming out of some of the questions that I was getting about you as sort of like the figurehead of Culver City Unofficial, like, does Dan O'Brien enforce his political position on the group and censor particular kinds of comments or posts? So I was going to let you kind of run with that for a bit and maybe give us some insight.
Yeah. Give a little background on it first. There was, when I started it, it wasn't with the intent to create a group of like a bulletin board, which is, probably the major function of it today.
Right.
It was literally the people I knew in flesh and blood in Culver City who were friends of mine, personal friends. And I've always been engaged in the community, and I had kind of almost insider knowledge about businesses opening, things that are going on, events, whatever it may be. And I thought it was just a more efficient way to, distribute that information to my friends that I knew. And
Right.
before, and at that stage, it wasn't a controlled arena. I didn't
Right.
I didn't check who was joining the page. I didn't even really know it was a page. I
Right.
thought it was just my personal wall where I was only the people in Culver City saw what I was posting, um, and
Right.
not my high school friends or not my
Right.
college friends, right? And
a,
then
quite a lovely mistake.
Yeah, yeah, right. And then it became, friends of my friends, started joining, and friends of my friends' friends started joining, and then quickly it got outside of my personal sphere, and it became just people in and around Culver City that were joining, and then it became people who were, former residents of Culver City but don't live here anymore, and then it became people who want to
Right.
spam Culver City and and sell their products, and then
Right.
and then before I knew it, people were saying objectionable things on there, and wow, I have to actually have to control this thing and moderate it. And
Right.
then it got to a place, probably it's been around I think for 10 years now, and it got to a place where I was being accused of having um, a bias towards certain things, and
Yeah.
I realized that that's probably true. So I reached out to people who um, on the group who showed a certain level of uh, I don't know, just kind of an ability to agree and disagree with people with varying opinions. And I had a mindset of trying
Yeah.
to get people from different backgrounds who are on my moderating team that I formed.
Right.
Um, and we did that. So I had this group of, I think, 5 or 6 of us, and we all got together and kind of penciled out some rules for the board, which included,
Mm-hmm.
no, basic stuff by being just civil to
Sure.
one another, not calling each other names, uh,
Right.
not putting photos of people without their permission, you know, uh,
Right.
having factual information distributed. And so,
Yeah.
then we got to where we are, today, and there's a lot of gray area in
Yeah.
what is objectionable and what is, like a truth, a universal truth, like a
Right.
fact. And when people's comments or posts are either not allowed or are removed, it's mostly because they're being uncivil to one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's the primary reason. Um,
And then just to jump in there, uncivil defined by like basic playground rules of name calling
More or
and
less, and there's and again, it seems on the surface, well, that's a very obvious thing to be able to filter, but you can
right.
we'll get people who will flag a comment or post.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get a notification and they'll say, this is inappropriate, you should do
Yeah.
something about it. And we'll read it and go, well, that's not objectionable in terms of
Mm-hmm.
it's an offensive comment directed at a person. It's just um, a difference of opinion
Right.
on something.
So then,
So sometimes that happens. And then
yeah.
I do want to add
Yeah. Please.
the sheer volume of
Yeah.
posts and comments that are going on
Right.
there.
Right.
We don't necessarily see them all,
Yeah.
and if there is a possibility that something truly objectionable gets posted,
Right.
and we don't know it because no one notifies us.
Right. Well, I mean, just the mechanics of it. Like if I were to post, it would go through moderation, but I could comment all day long and without moderation, and so I have noticed that, and that's
Yeah.
it's probably an impossible task to turn on moderation for even comments too. You would have to quit your full time job to moderate the page. At what point did it become like, it's at 13 plus thousand right now? What was the tipping point? Like, I don't even remember. I wasn't really tracking the numbers. A couple of years ago, where were you with the number of people on that page?
Yeah, I can't recall the exact timeline, but I'd say the page has grown by, I think it's probably slowed down because we've just reached a zenith in terms of the population of Culver City, right? But there was probably a 5-year period where it was
Got it.
going a couple thousand people per
And
year.
then do you have to be accepted into? Is it a private group? I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, you have to
Okay,
be accepted into it. So we look at it. There's a questionnaire basically. What, and it's simple. I think it's like, what's your connection to Culver City? Why do you want to join?
right, right.
And if you don't answer it, you're not accepted.
Got it.
Believe it or not, probably 2/3 to 3/4 of people aren't accepted because they don't answer the question.
Hmm.
And there's other red flags you learn about when you do this for
Right,
a while. They just opened their account like last week.
right,
Things like
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't. I mean, when you become an admin on a page, there's a whole bunch of tools and things that you see about different accounts that aren't available to the everyday user that do help you. The thing that you know things have been very heated when it comes to a number of the issues that your campaign is talking about. Public safety and homelessness, housing, things like that. And when these things come up, we're going to have a difference of opinion, obviously. And so, is there, other than name calling, like how I guess I'm sort of looking for, how do you address when someone would, let's say someone's knocking, you knock on a door to talk to say, hey, I'm Dan O'Brien running for city council. They, oh, you're Dan O'Brien. You're the guy who censored my post about move Culver City, or you're the one who didn't allow me to, like, how are you addressing that directly? Like, what's your public statement about these kinds of things? Because I guess I'm hearing it enough that, and I haven't experienced something like this in terms of my own posting. Maybe it's the way I post, but I don't know
Probably.
how. I don't know how. I guess I want to just dive under the layer a little bit more and just wonder, like, is it fair to say that some people will say that this page only goes with a particular kind of politics, or do you think that even in the attempt to be fair, mistakes are made or whatever, and like but it's never with the intent to highlight left, right, or center, but to I don't know, like, where are you on that?
Yeah, no, of course. Definitely mistakes are made. That's part of life. We make mistakes. I've stepped in it many times on the page where, and it's a digital footprint. So,
Yeah,
you make that mistake and you go, you can't reel it back in, right?
right.
So that's taught me a lot on how to engage in that sphere. But no, there's no political angle. I have allowed things in the past where I object to the opinion or the angle, but it was presented in a constructive, productive way, and it's okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Um, I think the thing about the page is that it's a very personal thing for the person who's experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't an indictment on any individual. It's just human nature.
Right.
We're very selfish and inward looking as a species, and
Mm-hmm.
you think you're being picked on when this happens to you, when something's not allowed or your comments removed. And in fact, it's also happening to a person who has a completely polar opinion as you do for the same
Mm-hmm.
reasons. You presented your argument while either making an accusation that isn't provable
Mm-hmm.
or literally being insulting towards another person,
Got it.
or something along those lines. People have gotten upset because it was recent. There was an incident at the schools, and people were upset with the way the school administration handled it in a public, in a public way, or not being public about it. And they're making accusations in posts. And as volunteers, myself and the other moderators, we don't have the bandwidth to investigate every accusation to see whether or not it has,
Right.
legs. And in
So
those
let me
in
let,
those
let me let
cases,
me let me
we
let's
err on the
let's
side.
use this. I think this is perfect to push into. Okay, so your experience is probably unique on the page in that it's created a lot of preparation for what you're trying to do,
Yeah,
and I think that and when we're talking about evidence, we're talking about photographs, and we're talking about allegations versus hunches backed with what looks to be evidence. So if we pivot from, but using the same kind of formula, pivot to discussion of what's come up in public records in looking at lobbyist groups that have been in closed door conversations with council members and staff members about housing, about land use, about changing R1, about incremental infill. The work that we've been doing in Common Sense Culver City, we've seen public records. We're tracking the emails that were never shared until we asked for them. And we were surprised to find things. And so we are looking at evidence. We are looking at examples of things that, whether or not someone wants to admit that there's fault here, or are we able to actually say, oh, yes, this is true, yet we're still looking at evidence and we're drawing conclusions, and we're trying to elevate the conversation about, well, what happens when there's an influence in city council that comes externally, and is that acceptable, and what should we do about it? So in your bid for council here, you're gonna talk about housing, you're gonna talk about R1. Just yesterday we all received the email that our housing element was rejected again, and actually it's putting our city in jeopardy of receiving future funding. If you read it carefully, it's like, wait a minute, we're no longer in compliance with state law, and being out of compliance with state law means that we may not receive federal, state, or local funding for things even like affordable housing programs, which is ironic that in the fight to create the incremental infill in R1 and to upzone R1 and to use Professor Elmendorf's work from UC Davis as the guiding light for our housing element. It's been a huge failure, and so I haven't really been posting about that on the unofficial page very much lately. I've been posting on the Common Sense Culver City blog instead. And so we can stop talking about your page, but we could still talk about the issue and looking at evidence. And so I want to just bring that and let you bat that one around a bit. Like, how are we going to protect the city from influencers and lobbyist groups? Let's just call it what it is. They're all connected to the YIMBY movement through the California YIMBY group, YIMBY Law. Culver City for More Homes, Abundant Housing in Los Angeles are all, subsidiaries of the California YIMBY group, and they're taking large donations from big corporations, and it's all been pretty well documented, as well as the the undue influence of people who don't live here in Culver City on council and staff decisions that have now led to the failure of the housing element twice. So, what's your take on all of that?
I think that there's opportunity, and I don't mean that in a positive sense, for lots of special interest groups to have outweighed influence in our city. I A friend of mine recently forwarded me an ordinance that Beverly Hills has. It's kind of a sunshine agreement or ordinance where any outside lobbying group has to register with the city, and there's certain uh, rules that they have to abide by under that, and which includes transparency. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a proactive way to deal with these issues, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd support that. I think that that's a great way for us to get in front of instead of react to
Yeah.
influence from outside organizations.
So, do you think that we need like, some new kind of committee that helps us to be transparent, or do we just need to uphold certain ethical standards and have
So yeah, so I mean, definitely we need to uphold ethical standards, but different people and different political groups, different walks of life have their own ethical standards, and they may be not in alliance with one another. So one person's ethics might not be
mm,
another's, right? So I think it's important first for us just to be transparent, and
mm-hmm,
that can be codified into law for Culver City. So I think we should do that. And the other part is that as a city and as a city council person, I would advocate for the strongest level of communication to the citizenry of Culver
mm,
City. We should make every effort to let people know what's happening. And I know from a lot of experience, many years in this town, that there's information that's being distributed, and Ryan, I know that you're on the beat. You
yeah,
always got the radar up, so people like you will usually see this information, but we
right,
have to make an assumption that most people won't be monitoring, and we have to make
mm-hmm,
it um, almost spoon fed for the average person to be able to know when a substantive issue
mm-hmm,
is on the table.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good point. I think that there's been very little communication coming out of City Hall in a way that is digestible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bloated language, a lot of terms that people don't use every day. Um, and there's also just a sort of infrequency. It needs to be much more frequent, smaller, easier to understand, and not just through Facebook and Twitter. I mean,
I,
you're right.
I would argue that they're not on Facebook enough.
Yeah, maybe.
I think, I mean, that not everyone gets their information that way. And it needs to be, information needs to be targeted for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So who is being impacted most directly? There should be an outsized level of outreach to these stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe someone who's got, um, who lives next to Culver Boulevard, where the median was recently realigned over recently over the course of 3 years, realigned.
Right.
Um, those folks really need to be, the neighbors around there need to be kept abreast,
Mm-hmm.
on the regular.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who lives in the arts district, maybe they should get, milepost updates.
Mm-hmm.
but they're not dealing with the dust and the traffic and the noise and all the stuff that people that live adjacent to the construction site, right?
Right.
So we should be working really hard to be sure the people who are most impacted are given the most amount of notice,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time have a broader message to the entire city what's coming down the pipeline.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that would be smart. And then, just to, I think the last sort of point on this one is, R1. Are you in favor of keeping R1?
Yes, I am. I mean, and on multiple levels. I mean, the reason for the movement to eliminate R1 is to create more affordable housing. That's the stated goal of that, right? To increase the housing.
Well, it shifts. I mean, to be honest, it shifts. Sometimes it's the climate crisis.
Right, but that's
Right.
the primary. I think that's everyone's. So
Sure.
even if you're an opponent of R1 upzoning or in favor of it, the big goal is to create a bigger affordable housing market. Make it more accessible to people of varied incomes, right? And that's not going to happen. The projections for R1 upzoning, I believe, was
Right.
something like 137 units
It was a very small number.
over 9 years, and people are dying. They're falling on the sword to argue for R1 upzoning, whereas we need to create 3,400 units by 2029 actionable. We don't have to create the 3,400 by that,
Right.
but we have to provide
Demonstrate a plan
that will
that makes sense.
that makes sense, right? You're not going to do it by doing it that way. The quickest way, both from just a building perspective, and also from an economies of scale perspective,
Yeah.
is to target our commercial zones,
Right.
where there's large pieces of land. They need to be rezoned into mixed use zoning classifications where we can put housing there, create communities. There's the upzoning folks also want there's an environmental reasoning behind it. Well, if you can create multi-use, mixed use communities where you've got your grocery store and your laundromat and a park and and varied levels of housing all in the same place, then you got people who aren't getting in their cars, they're getting recreation. There's economies of scale. You're building many units at once, so you can have expensive ones, you can have the penthouse, and you can have more affordable ones too, and that creates diverse communities as well, right?
No, I think you're right about that, and I also think that some people might say, well, yeah, that sounds cool, but I don't necessarily want to just hang out in one neighborhood all the time. Like, I do want to drive around Los Angeles and Southern California and experience all kinds of things. So like the linking the removal of cars, or the frustration of car traffic to the housing thing has been sort of it's just been a cluster of different ideas that I think have sort of stymied real progress, and then kind of just mostly angered people into we're not really talking about big ideas now. We're just sort of upset and trying to defend something that we try to carve out here in Culver City. Like it's a big deal to buy a home. Like it's probably the biggest expense that most people will ever have,
or the rent.
Right, and then now that rent is ballooned alongside of it, it's super difficult. So I think that untangling things and not making everything always about these ideological shifts, I think would be really helpful. I think the sort of like a common sense. I mean, that we're phrase comes up a lot, like just to, just cut through things and make them more achievable. I mean, I think part of what's been frustrating and why, I got involved at this level is, there's an assumption that if you're, a homeowner, that somehow or other you are now just extremely wealthy and you don't struggle to find work or pay bills. I mean, this is not true. And so like just instead of slinging mud, what I'm hoping that this new election season brings is candidates that are really looking to help help us navigate that mess of ideas and make them so that we can move forward and actually talk together. I can recall attending plenty of meetings where it felt like, okay, it sounds like we're going to all talk, but then and really like duke it out, and but then there's no follow up to it. Like we have like a 3-hour something or other at the senior center, and everyone shows up, and wow, this is a big turnout for the community. But then nothing happens, and then it just feels like months go by, and then the decision that lots of people in the room were against is the one that goes forward. It's like, how did that happen? Like, where's dialogue? What is the purpose of dialogue? Is there any dialogue? Or is it all just a ruse to somehow like check off on a list that okay, we had public outreach, we had this big meeting, it was on this date, 500 people showed up, here's what they thought, and then we all decided to vote against the majority of the citizens. Like that has been the experience of many people for a number of years now, and it's. I think that we need to talk about that, and I think we need to be honest that, and so I think your efforts in trying to bring transparency and why I'm doing this right now live with you is an effort to bring more transparency to things, and so the other big issue that came up a number of times in my questions, and maybe this could be the last one we deal with for today, and I can ask you back another time. Yeah. Is people who are living on the streets of Culver City, and I've been receiving a lot of different emails about this. Some people are sharing with me emails that Helen Chin and Christina Stoffers are writing. There are a lot of different posts all over Facebook about this and photographs, and people are trying to figure out. And how can we help? How can we turn this into something that isn't just a negative? And it isn't just about does it look dirty or to have all this garbage? Yes, of course it looks dirty, and to have that all that's. But how about this human being? Are we helping this person, or are we just driving, walking, riding our bikes by every day? Like, what is the actual effort? I mean, I know that we're spending a lot of money to engage with, St. Joseph's, and there was another organization, I forgot the name of it, UBH, I want to say is the initials, but I just saw it in the agenda for Monday. But anyway, so there's tons of money that we're spending to not only to staff, people in the city to work on this, but contracting with other organizations that are doing outreach to try to help people to get services that they need to ultimately get off of the streets. But it also feels at the same time that it's growing. And then of course, we don't have to linger on it. We all know about the project to extend the sidewalk, and where all of a sudden we're going to put money into what most people would imagine would just become a bigger space for people to take over as living space and won't really be a sidewalk. So I want to know some of your thoughts about actually how to cut through all of this and actually make a difference, make a change, and then sort of specifically, because I think this is where we are stuck. There is an ordinance that you can't camp, right? Like there is an anti-camping ordinance. It's a law. It's on the books. The police have told me directly, and a number of people in the community, that they've been asked by city council not to enforce that anti-camping ordinance. And so it just doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. It just seems like we keep, trying to just push it aside, and also say at the same time that we're trying to help. And I just don't see it. Like I want to be part of a solution, but I just don't know how. Like how do I help? Like what would you tell me? Like, hey, this is my idea. I'm running for city council. This is what I think we ought to do, and here's how you can help to make that happen, so that there should be nobody living on the street. Everybody should be receiving any mental or health services they need, and everybody should have a home. So, like, what are we going to do? Now is my huge question, and you only have 10 seconds to respond. No, just kidding. So.
All right. Okay. First, I think everyone on all sides of the issue agree that it's really complex. Okay. I've actually had a lot of experience in this world of, I was on the very first homelessness committee back in 2004. It was formed because of myself and other neighbors' concerns about homelessness, basically residing in the playground in Betts Park.
Right.
And because of that, we were, there was a task force, a committee created that eventually became a permanent standing committee in Culver City. And we created solutions there. Okay. At the time, there was a cold weather shelter where the Armory is, and now it's the Venda Museum. And there was a state mandate that armories would act as that function. And I think it's still ongoing. And so at that time, we didn't have a lot of homeless in Culver City.
Right.
So that was a regional center to shelter homeless overnight. But to bring the homeless here, they would, I think it was, I'm not sure the organization at the time, but they would go around the region, the west side, pick up homeless, give them shelter for the night. But then there was no incentive for them to, to go back during the day, and we didn't have a place to have them be. So they would just go across the street to the park. And instead we switched out the management of that. And we had a more effective organization. I don't know if it was St. Joseph's, I can't recall, but it was a different change. And then we also provided services like a meal if these folks got back on the bus during the daytime. And so those folks that were homeless and needed shelter at night were also receiving services now, and we got our playground back. Mm-hmm. So that's an actionable effort, and it was done with city staff. And there's a lot of education going on. I didn't know anything about, anything regarding the homeless. And we met with PATH, we met with St. Joseph's, we met with other advocacy groups, and it was a great learning experience. And today, during COVID, it was myself and a group of 5 or 6 other active residents who got Feed Culver going. And the food insecure, it's not necessarily homeless.
Right.
Some of these folks have homes, but during COVID, they couldn't afford, they didn't have their jobs. So we provided, food and we kept our restaurants afloat because we were buying the food from our local restaurants. So in response to what we're dealing with on the streets today, there's a major imbalance favoring not helping the homeless or the unhoused, but just keeping them on the streets, and zero focus on the residents who are experiencing this in the sense of the big encampments that we have, like under the underpasses or by a creek, where there's trash, there's increased crime, In the case of the sidewalks, people can't walk across them. There have been violent occurrences in
Yeah.
these locations, and the residents that live, just 100 feet away are being ignored. So that's a major imbalance. There's a national, cities like LA and then ultimately Culver City uh, began allowing, looking the other way with in regards to these encampments because, and I'm paraphrasing and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is because of a Boise court case where they concluded that if you can't provide housing for these folks, you have to allow them to camp. That's now been challenged. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be compassionate and provide that housing.
Right.
We're not mandated to, but we have a degree of a moral obligation. But we can't house in Culver City every person. I mean, I think if we were to house everyone that's there now and the sidewalks got cleared tomorrow, it wouldn't take long because we are a part of a larger region for it to fill up again. And we don't
Right.
have the financial resources it takes to do that. So I know that Home Key, I think that's the program you were talking
Yeah.
about. They are funding the conversion of 2 motels over there. There's going to be 79 beds. I had a phone conversation, a conference call with 2 of the leaders of that organization. They spoke with me about another motel in East LA where they've done the same, and crime actually went down around that motel after they did that. The motels, there's going to be wraparound services there. They're going to be, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's domestic violence, that folks, that's the reason why the people are on the streets. Job placement, coaching, all these things, they're going to be offered. The properties are going to be secured 24 hours. There's going to be a handyman on site,
Wow.
there's
Yeah.
going to be cleaning services, all these things. So we're soon going to be providing that. Once that happens, that's when we shift the gears, and I think we begin truly enforcing our code. And I'm going to be upfront. I don't know what that no camping code is, so
Okay.
I don't know if that's strong. I know that in the past, the police were not pushing the homeless away. They were just actively.
Yeah.
They were saying, "Hey, how you doing? We've got
Right.
resources for you, things like that." And from what I've been told, these folks just didn't want to be bothered, and they would just move along at that stage. I think we should make a concerted effort to help on every level. And if these folks aren't accepting or receiving the help,
Yeah. What do we do then?
and it's got to be real help. It's
for
not
sure.
sending them to some shelter in Compton. We've got to have a place for them, and I think we'll have enough beds to do that. And then we enforce the code. It's like if you don't move your things, then we have to. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move it for you. But it has to. We can't just start throwing without a solution. We can't throw people out without a solution. We have to say we've got this option for you that is not right here. That's the compassion element.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the projected timeline is for the.
My understanding
Two motels.
is in this calendar year.
Well, that's hopeful then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think. I think your experience, what you described, is really helpful actually too. Like, and I think ultimately everyone does want to help, and it's just I think that what I am personally experiencing, my interactions and then things that are being forwarded my way, ultimately has been turning into anger and frustration because people keep having the experience of the cities not the city's not doing anything.
Yeah.
And even though they are, but we don't get to see it all, and it's hard to have that all documented. But then there becomes a point where it's like, well, wait a minute, what if the city's done everything it can and we still have an encampment near our home?
Yeah.
What do we do then? And what if the motels aren't open yet, right? And so I think we're in that in-between phase right now.
I know. I definitely, if someone is if a resident, I'm not saying a homeowner, I'm saying someone who is, owns their home or rents, and they're experiencing a scenario where they feel unsafe,
Mm-hmm.
because, and I'm not just saying a perceived feeling of insecurity, because I know people who live in a gated community because they don't feel
Sure.
safe, so there's perceptions of what safety is, depending upon the person. But if there's truly incidents that are threatening someone's safety and well-being, then we need to address that,
Right.
especially if we have laws on the books to do that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I feel and then I think what you just said, I think, is a lot of what people are waiting for our current leaders to say. And I think that that's an interesting distinction. People, there are more questions coming in on the YouTube than I can handle, plus all the ones that I already have. So we'll definitely have to schedule another chat. But I think that there's this we are in this in between, and it's clear that some action should be taken before the next election and before the motels are open. Something has to be done to help everybody. So it's now I'll just leave that right there. But
I also like to say, Ryan, I was at the council meeting on about 2 Mondays ago.
Yeah.
And I will say, I hope going forward people will, express their passionate, experiences, but, keep it in a way where we can, we don't have to have people escorted out of the room. And I hear what those experiences are. And it really saddens me. And I think we need to show the balance in our governance and the way we, deal with these issues, so that people's voices are heard. I've heard reflected back people who are only focused on the vitriol that was displayed, and they're completely tuning out the stories that we heard.
Right. No, that's a good point.
And that's problematic, because there were real stories. There was a woman who felt like I think her words were, she feels trapped in her own home.
Yes.
A gentleman who was I think he was crying as he was expressing his frustration that his daughter can't walk to her high school sports practices. These are real stories. And for those that are only heard the vitriol, but didn't hear the other stories, those real stories, that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, it's a human nature thing where we take things personally, and then suddenly you don't listen to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've learned from that Facebook page. No, seriously,
I believe you. I'm not laughing because it's fun. I'm laughing because it's so true. It just kind of like, wow, the Facebook page was, that's a big deal.
I don't know if emotionally I was ready for this 5 years ago. And it's taught me a lot in that regard.
That's awesome.
So,
wow. Okay. Well, we're gonna wrap there. I'll definitely have you back in the coming weeks and months as we keep being candid with the candidates. So I appreciate your time and your willingness to dive right in.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Right.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay. Bye bye. Talk to you later.